everyone. Welcome to Wealth Redefined. I'm your host, Michael Reynolds, certified financial planner and owner of Elevation Financial. I'm on the web at elevationfinancial.com. Should I use my HELOC as an emergency fund? Some people ask this question. They're curious about it. When financial advisors talk about emergency funds, they typically paint a pretty standard picture. It's 3 to 6 months of expenses. Park that in a high yield savings account. You want it liquid, accessible, ready when life throws you a curveball. It's simple, and it's exactly what most people expect to hear. However, some people look at your home equity line of credit sitting there with $50,000 or $100,000 credit limit, and a thought crosses your mind. Why am I letting cash earn a little bit of interest in a savings account when I could invest that money, in theory, the goal being for more growth, and just tap my HELOC if I need it? It's a fair question, but it doesn't really have a one-size-fits-all answer. So let's talk through this and see if it makes sense. First, let's just talk about the concept of using HELOCs as emergency funds. So a home equity line of credit, or HELOC for short, gives you access to a revolving credit line secured by your home's equity. Unlike a traditional loan where you get a lump sum, a HELOC works more like a credit card. You can draw money from it when you need it, pay it back, and draw again during the draw period, which typically lasts about 10 years, give or take. It varies. The appeal is pretty obvious. Instead of parking $30,000 in a savings account, you can invest that money in the market or use it to pay down higher interest debt. Then, if an emergency hits, you tap into your HELOC. On paper, that seems efficient, but in practice, it's a little more complicated. So what is the case for using a HELOC as an emergency fund? Let's start with why this strategy can look attractive on the surface. So first, one of the goals being higher returns on your money. The math is pretty straightforward. So hypothetically, let's say a savings account pays 3% and the stock market historically returns around 9% annually. Again, this is hypothetical, not specific, no guarantees. It's just a hypothetical example. Keeping less cash on hand and more money invested could theoretically leave you better off over time. For someone with a stable income, excellent credit, significant home equity, the opportunity cost of keeping large amounts of cash in savings can feel substantial. Over a decade, the difference in earning between 4% and 9% or 3% and 9% on $50,000 is pretty significant. What about flexibility and scalability? A HELOC can provide more borrowing capacity than most people would reasonably keep in savings. If you face a $60,000 emergency and only have $20,000 in savings, you'll need to find another funding source anyway, right? With a HELOC, you have larger amounts of capital if needed, and you're not limited by how much you've managed to save. Also, the interest-only payments during the draw period are pretty attractive. During the draw period, most HELOCs require interest-only payments on the amount you borrow. This can make the monthly cost of using your HELOC pretty manageable, especially compared to the fixed principal and interest payments required with a more traditional loan. So if you borrow $10,000 at 9% interest, your initial monthly payment could only be $75 in interest. That gives you breathing room to recover financially without the pressure of large monthly payments. All right, now let's talk about the risks of relying on a HELOC, the other side of the equation, and that's where things start to get more uncomfortable. So first off, your home is the collateral. This is the big one. When you use your home to secure a line of credit, you're putting your home at risk. You're unable to make payments on your HELOC, or if you're unable to make payments on your HELOC, you could end up in foreclosure. An emergency fund and a savings account has zero risk to your housing security, though. A HELOC does, and that's a fundamentally different risk profile. Also, HELOCs can be frozen or reduced. Here's what might keep you up at night about using a HELOC as an emergency fund. The bank can freeze or reduce your credit line when you might need it the most. For example, during the 2008 financial crisis, many homeowners discovered this the hard way. As home values dropped, lenders froze HELOCs or reduced credit limits, sometimes without much warning. So people who thought they had $100,000 in available credit suddenly had $20,000 or even nothing at all. And the worst part was, this often happens during times of economic downturns, which is exactly when you're more likely to face a job loss or other financial emergency, and that could be when you need it the most. All right. Also, variable interest rates can cause uncertainty. So most HELOCs have variable interest rates tied to the prime rate. When the Federal Reserve raises rates, your HELOC rate goes up too. So in a low rate environment, borrowing at 4 or 5% can feel manageable, but rates can and do sometimes change quickly. In 2022 and 2023, for example, we saw the Fed raise rates at one of the fastest paces in history. Someone who set up a HELOC when rates were 3% might end up with a 9% HELOC or higher. If you lose a job during a period of rising rates, you're not just dealing with lost income, you're also facing higher borrowing costs on any money you might need to access. And then there's the temptation to use it for non-emergencies. So this is more of a behavioral issue, but it does matter. A HELOC can feel less real than watching your savings account balance drop. That psychological distance can make it easier to justify non-emergency expense. And before you know it, you've used your emergency fund for a kitchen renovation. And then when the real emergency hits, your HELOC is already partially or even all the way tapped out. All right. So when could a HELOC strategy maybe work? So despite all the risks, there are scenarios where a HELOC as part of your emergency strategy could make sense. The key here is the word part. So let's say you have a true emergency fund plus a HELOC. Some people take a hybrid approach. They might keep a smaller cash emergency fund, maybe 2 or 3 months of expenses, and view their HELOC as a backup layer of protection for larger or extended emergencies. This gives you immediate access to cash without needing to apply for or draw on credit during crisis. But you still have the HELOC available if you need more than your cash reserves. Also, let's say your income is very stable. So suppose you work in a profession with exceptional job security, or you have multiple income streams. In that case, the risk of needing emergency funds while simultaneously being unable to make HELOC payments decreases significantly. So, for example, tenured professors, certain government employees, business owners with long-term contracts and diversified revenue might fit that category. But even then, unexpected medical expenses or other emergencies can come up regardless of income stability. Also, let's say you have excellent financial discipline. Using a HELOC as part of your emergency strategy requires discipline. You might be someone who won't touch it for non-emergencies and who will aggressively pay it down if you use it. You also need to have a plan for monitoring your available credit and staying aware of any changes your lender might make to your line. So those are some examples where, in part, it could be part of your strategy. But what should most people do instead? For the majority of people, a traditional emergency fund still makes more sense as the foundation of your financial security. Start with those cash reserves. 3 to 6 months of essential expenses in a high yield savings account or money market gives you true liquidity and no risk to your home. Yes, you might earn less on this money, but that's the cost of insurance. That's what it's for. It's insurance, not investment. Remember, financial security is not always about optimizing every dollar for maximum return. Sometimes it's about sleeping well at night and knowing you can handle whatever comes your way. So consider a HELOC as supplemental coverage. If you want to pursue this strategy, establish a HELOC, but think of it as backup coverage rather than your emergency fund as a primary emergency fund. Keep your emergency fund intact in cash and set up a HELOC for additional borrowing capacity if you need it. This gives you the best of both worlds. You've got immediate liquidity without credit applications during crisis, plus additional capacity if you face an unusually large or a prolonged emergency. Also, calculate your true risk tolerance. So before making the decision, run through some scenarios. What would happen if you lost your job during a recession when your home value had dropped 20% and interest rates were at 10%? Can you still make HELOC payments while covering your essential expenses? Do you have other resources you could tap? How does your partner feel about using your home as collateral for emergency expenses? These aren't necessarily fun questions to consider, but they are important. Also, the economic environment matters. So your decision about whether to use a HELOC as an emergency fund shouldn't happen in a vacuum. The current economic environment should influence your thinking. In a low rate environment with a strong housing market, the risks of a HELOC strategy are a little bit lower. In a high rate environment or when housing markets are volatile, these risks can significantly increase. That doesn't mean a HELOC strategy is off the table, but it does mean you need to be realistic about the risk you're taking on. So when you're making the decision, consider these questions. 1, how stable is your income? If you lost your job tomorrow, how long would it realistically take you to find comparable employment? What's your home equity position? Do you have substantial equity that would protect you even if home values dropped? What's your risk tolerance? Honestly assess how you'd feel using your home as collateral and potentially facing variable interest rates during a crisis. Do you have backup resources? Are there other places you could access funds if your HELOC was frozen or reduced? What's your financial discipline like? Can you resist the temptation to use credit for non-emergencies? These questions don't have right or wrong answers, but they really should guide your decision. So, bottom line, using a HELOC as an emergency fund isn't always inherently wrong, but it's also not the straightforward optimization it might appear to be on the surface. This strategy works best for people with stable incomes, strong financial discipline, substantial home equity, and a clear understanding of the risks involved. It works even better when it's layered on top of cash reserves and it only exists as part of your emergency fund. So the peace of mind that comes from having cash available without risking your home is often worth the opportunity cost of the slightly lower returns. So remember, investing is not just about maximizing growth. It's also about managing risk. So your emergency fund exists for worst case scenarios. Make sure that strategy still works even when everything else is going wrong. All right. So with that, I appreciate you joining me today. As always, if you'd like to learn more or reach out and talk, you can reach me on pretty much any social profile or my website, which is elevationfinancial.com. And you can even book a complimentary consultation online. You can schedule that at your convenience and we can chat. And if you want to consider becoming a client, we can talk about that as well. All right, everyone. Thanks for joining me today. Have a great day. We will see you next time.